Welcome to our real estate seminar. It's going to be, I think, a very lively and interesting discussion. A lot of interesting events going on around the world. And I'm sure we're going to cover most of them and let you know sort of what we think the impact is going to be. So my job tonight, my name is Nicola. My job tonight is to be your MC, your host, and to introduce this very talented panel. Just before I get started on that, I'd like to go through a little background on the history of land. So I did a little research on this and found out that roughly about 15,000 years ago, humans started to domesticate crops. And once they started to do that, they realized that they could generate cash flow from land. And once they realized they could do that, they could start to build some real wealth. Now, if we fast forward roughly about 10,000 years, we come to Egypt. And some of you may recognize this picture. Yes, that is little Donny Osmond. And if you haven't seen the musical, it's a great musical. And if you know, we all know the story of Joseph. You know, he was imprisoned. He got out of prison because he could read Pharaoh's dreams and basically saved Egypt from a famine. What's the interesting thing was about this is I started to do some research about what happened after that. And this is a quote from the Bible. I'm going to just put my glasses on so I read it properly. But it says the following. It says, so Joseph bought all of the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. From Genesis. And I thought that was really interesting because it's maybe one of the earliest examples of land speculation where somebody finds an individual who can actually predict the future and then figures out a way to buy low. And I'm just wondering if there's anybody today we can think of that would be similar to that. Maybe this guy. Now, personally, I think Donald Trump would have been, if he'd been born back then, I think he would have been a great pharaoh. In fact, who knows, he still might be. And in fact, if he had been born back then, my guess is because of his great marketing skills, he would have rebranded some things in Egypt. He would have had the Trump Sphinx as opposed to the Trump Tower. He probably would have built a wall across the Sinai Desert to keep the riffraff out. Although thinking about it, it's not necessarily a good thing because if he kept the riffraff out, the pyramids today would be a lot smaller. So, if we fast forward to where real estate is today, there's a magazine comes out once a year with sort of the global real estate picture. This is called Cavils, and it estimated in its last edition that the global value of real estate around the world is $217 trillion US, which obviously is a bucket full of money. And let's just take a look at where that money comes from. So approximately $26 trillion of that is real estate. $29 trillion of that is commercial, and the largest portion, $162 trillion, is housing, of which about $100 trillion is personal use housing. But if we break out the investable side from the personal use side, we end up with the following. So we take a look at residential investable real estate. So these typically be apartment buildings, $55 trillion around the world of value, which is exactly the same as all public equity markets for every country in the world combined. Now, if we add to that the commercial side and the farming side, we end up with a total in investable real estate that's 50% more than that which is available in public markets. But if we were to take a look at the average investor in Canada or the US or pretty well most places in the world, we'd find that they would have almost 3 times as much money invested in public equities than in investable real estate. So obviously somebody owns this investable real estate. Interestingly, it is not retail investors. Typically it's pensions, institutions, family offices, ultra-high net worth individuals. So perhaps they have some sense of things that other investors don't have. And they're willing to trade, if you will, liquidity for stability and cash flow. So here's another interesting thing from the same article. It talks about, where is the real estate owned? And there's a lot of busy numbers up on here, but basically, if we took a look at the population of China, Hong Kong, and Asia combined, approximately, their real estate is worth 22% of global commercial real estate. This is just commercial real estate we're looking at here. But they are 56% of the world's population. Meanwhile, in North America is 5% of the world's population, and the value of the real estate is 45% of all global real estate that's commercial is in North America. So here's a statistic that I'm sure is going to change over the next 20 to 30 years. So we're going to be looking at a number of questions tonight, including things such as, obviously, what's going to happen to interest rates. We're going to look, of course, at the elephant in the room, which is the Donald. Taking a look at what about other alternatives? What about farmland or infrastructure, development properties? And finally, what about other crises that have occurred, like Brexit? And the reason I happen to mention Brexit is I noticed the other day, looking at the impact of real estate around the world in terms of where value might be. So if you were to look at a package of real estate trusts based out of the UK, you'd find that in British pounds, they're worth exactly the same today that they were worth a decade ago. That would not be true of Canadian or US real estate. But if you look at it because of the way the pound has dropped over that time frame, UK real estate is 50% cheaper today in the form of REITs than it was a decade ago. Is that an opportunity or is that a trap? Something maybe the panel can take a look at when they're talking about their questions. So let's talk about the panel. So our first guest is Don Harrison. Now, these guys were very kind to give me some special information about each of them, which I want to share with you. But let me just start with the basics for Don. He's an executive VP, I should say, of Great-West Life Realty, which manages $18 billion in real estate in Canada. Member of the executive and investment committees, previously with Cadillac Fairview and Royal LePage, and past president of the Vancouver chapter of the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. I asked Don, and I asked all the panelists to share with me something from their youth. You know, how did they get started? Something like from a long time ago. So in Don's case, he was kind enough to give me his high school picture. I don't know, I think he's kind of cute. And I'm trying to, when I looked at this picture, I was thinking, you know, he's channeling somebody. Who is the somebody he's channeling? And it finally dawned on me. It's David Cassidy. And why would he be channeling David Cassidy, the Partridge Family? Because he wanted to get a date with Susan Day. Now, mind you, I wanted to get a date with Susan Day as well, but that never happened. Now, our next panelist is John Foresi. John is a very successful CEO of Ventura Realty. We are partnered with him in a whole number of U.S. real estate assets. He was awarded Top 40 Under 40 and Top 100 Impact Executive by B2B Magazine. Their company owns 30,000 apartments all throughout the U.S., and he's been involved in $4 billion worth of real estate transactions. And he's invested for a lot of major organizations, including CalPERS, Blackstone, and GE as well. So, of course, I asked John for some picture as well. And this is what he sent me, another high school graduation picture. Now, the first thing I thought about when I saw this picture was, nobody should be entitled to that much hair. And then I tried to think, okay, who does he remind me of? Well, Vinnie Barbarino. And as it turns out, rumor has it that both these Johns are very good on the dance floor. They have some pretty quick moves. So, our next panelist, I'm going to try not to humiliate him any more than the other two, is Andrew Bibby. Andrew joined Grosvenor Real Estate in 1984 and is a CEO, has been since 2009. Grosvenor, if you're not aware of it, manages $30 billion of real estate worldwide, was founded almost 350 years ago in 1677, in England, of course. He's director of the Canadian Western Bank, Rugby Canada, and UBC Properties Trust, and past director of the Real Property Association of Canada, and former member of the Sauder Advisory Board. Now, Andrew sent me, an even younger picture. And I'm asking myself, now this was a tougher one to come up with, but it occurred to me, finally dawned on me, I've lived around, seen enough old TV shows to remember Opie. Now, a lot of you are going to be there too young to say, Opie? Who's Opie? And he's on the Andy Griffith Show. Who's Andy Griffith? As it turns out, this is little Ronnie Howard, if you're not aware of that already. And I would say both of them have developed amazingly since then. Andrew has kept his hair. Ronnie, of course, turned out like I did. And this brings us to our managing director of Nicola Crosby, Wayman Crosby. Wayman was a graduate of UBC in land economics. It's been more than 25 years of real estate experience. As mentioned, he's the managing director for Nicola Crosby. He's our hero because he recently won the Canuck Place adventure race, trashing 30-year-olds, just leaving them wasted on the sidelines. I thought that was great. And he's been married 36 years to Penny. So I asked Wayman for a picture, and he went a little older. He came up with this picture, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know exactly who this looks like, but I know who he wants it to look like. He wants it to look like Magnum PI. Why? I mean, who not? Can't you just see Wayman as a young man, being a private investigator living on this huge Hawaiian ocean estate and not having to pay rent? Yeah, I can see that. And finally, I'd like you to bring us to our moderator tonight, Mark Hanna. So Mark has been more than 30 years in the real estate industry. He opened the Avison & Young office in 1994 and was managing partner there. He's responsible for all the acquisitions for the 3 different Spire limited partnerships that we have, has been working with us for about a dozen years, and he is director of Lionsgate Hospital. He has been for the last 9 years. And so he sends me this picture, also pre-high school graduation. Very cute hockey player, don't you think? And of course, obviously, he connected to his hero, Bobby Orr, which makes sense. Now, the fact is that Mark is known in hockey for having a great hip check, which is fine. It's great for hockey. The trouble is, Mark uses it when he's playing golf for money. So he doesn't realize that golf is actually not a contact sport. So ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel tonight. Please welcome them up to the stage.